Hello, this is Jamie Mitchell, and we are back with another episode of the Libertarian Uncensored podcast, going over all the posts on Libertarian Censored subreddit. Let's get right into it. So first we have, what is Steve Bannon hiding about Jeffrey Epstein? It's truly bizarre that so little attention has been paid to the fact that Steve Bannon is currently concealing what might be the greatest Epstein-related treasure trove of them all from mtracy.net, and that was posted by Ninja Lover, and that's cross-post from the We the Fifth subreddit. And yeah, I personally don't really care too much for Bannon, just like the rest of them. As George Carlin famously said, it's a big club, and you ain't in it, and I think he's a member of the big club just like Trump and the rest of them are, and he's probably incriminated in those files as well. They probably are all incriminated. That's why they'll never release them, because, it'll incriminate way too many of them, and then people will start seeing them all as illegitimate, and that's ultimately the only reason that people view them as legitimate are for two reasons. Or one is they have the monopoly on legal use of force, and two is that they view them as legitimate. If they stop viewing them as legitimate, they'll cease to be legitimate, and that's what the Epstein files, why they'll probably never be released in full, because no one will, because it will seek to illegitimize the entire U.S. government, and especially of how Epstein might have been a member of Israel's CIA and Mossad, and that will even delegitimize it even more. So that's why I don't think we'll ever get the full Epstein files, because ultimately the government's legitimacy probably depends on it at this point. And I personally don't think the government's legitimate at all, but ultimately a lot of people do, and I think if these files do get released, people are going to stop viewing it as such, and that's my thoughts there. Then we have Trump, who wants to straighten out the press, sues the Wall Street Journal over fake Epstein letter. Whatever the merits of this particular defamation claim, the president has a long history of abusing the legal system to punish constitutionally protected speech. And that's from Reason.com, listed by CH4Locks, and that's a cross-post from the We the Fifth subreddit. And yeah, personally, I don't really, he sometimes he might be correct in that some speech against him might be slander or libel or defamation or any of the similar words like that. But ultimately, just because something falls under one of those words doesn't mean that it still isn't freedom of speech. Freedom of speech should be absolute, and I do think the media does kind of give Trump a hard time while giving the Democrats a relatively easy time, or at least most of them. There are some exceptions, like Fox News, Breitbart, or The Blaze is another one. But just because they might be against him doesn't give them permission to censor them through the force of the state. And yeah, I personally don't really care for it. For a lot of them, like a lot of people are saying he's using the force of the state to push CBS to cancel Colbert, even though Colbert was really not too popular anyway, and his shtick was pretty much only for the readiest of redditors. But just because I don't care for your speech doesn't mean I don't support your right to do it. Just because stuff like Colbert and The View are the shitlibbiest of shitlibs doesn't mean they don't have the right to free speech. And yeah, personally, I think they're just kind of circle jerks and extremely tired ones at that. But I do think you need to defend free speech, even if it's for speech you despise. That's what Noam Chomsky says. We don't believe in free speech for speech we despise. We don't believe in it at all. And I would very much agree with that. So yeah, I definitely would be against all of Trump's lawsuits against the media, however biased it might be against him. And that's my thoughts on that issue. I think the libertarian position is, let stuff like The Late Show or The View become relevant on their own merits, rather than use the force of the state to cancel or sue them. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have This Is What Guilt Looks Like, posted by Donald Key, and that's a cross post from the Blue Sky Skeets subreddit, and that looks like a Blue Sky post from Brian Tyler Cohen, who posted This Is What Fear Looks Like, and then he looks like he posted an image of another post of his, or tweet, or I don't know. And it says, Donald Trump has removed the Wall Street Journal from the White House press pool for his upcoming trip to punish them for reporting on his connections to Jeffrey Epstein. And yeah, personally, that's why, I don't think we should have a White House press pool or White House any White House press room at all, because the White House, just like everyone else, is going to be biased to certain media sources over others. And yeah, that's why I personally think if it were up to me, I just got the White House press department entirely. If they want to report on what they want to report on, they already have their narratives. You don't have to ask the administration what they think about it. I just think the White House, the press secretary, is just the propaganda wing for the White House, kind of. So I just get rid of that whole branch. And yeah, that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have vote to release Epstein files scrapped by Republican leadership from telegraph.co.uk, posted by Donald Key. And yeah, just, as I said, just because it probably incriminates a great deal of them as well, just like it incriminates a great deal of the Democrats. And that's why, you do have some good Republicans like Thomas Massie. He's trying to release the Epstein files, but a lot of them do seem to be irredeemable, corrupt pieces of shit. Same with a lot of the Democrats. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have Trump says he was the hunted from official White House account posted by Donald Key, and that's a cross post from the persecution subreddit, and that looks like a tweet from the White House. They came after the wrong man, and it's Trump over a background with fireworks, American flags, and eagles, and it says, "I was the hunted, now I'm the hunter, President Donald J. Trump." And yeah, I'm not, just because, they might have gone after him during, Biden's tenure doesn't mean that it's suddenly right when he goes after the other party. But, I think it's all just theater. It's all just WWE. They were never going to get Trump in prison, and they're never going to get Obama or Biden or Crooked Hillary in prison. It's all just theater. They never ever seem to get anyone who isn't a liability. Like sometimes they might someone like Bob Menendez, they might say, "Oh, you're too much of a liability," and let him go to prison. But that's really the exception rather than the rule. If you're a big enough, the truth is, if you're a big enough name in American politics, you're pretty much never going to be held accountable for anything you do, and that's true regardless of which branch of the uniparty you serve. Then we have What's Wrong with Trump Supporters, posted by Fast Seaworthiness 739, and that's a meme of all the NPCs, and they're all wearing MAGA hats, and they're all saying, "If I'm so mad, I can't believe it, but if given the chance, I would vote for the same thing." And yeah, that just goes to show you how, as I say in a lot of episodes of these podcasts, people don't have values; they only have teams. Donald Trump, you can make the argument that he's the lesser of two evils, but that lesser of two evils is still an evil. Same with, Kamala Harris or whoever the Democrats are nominating. They're all part of the same swamp, and nothing will change as long as either the Republicans or Democrats continue to hold power. It's like Obama in 2008 said, "Oh, my whole campaign's about change," but when he got elected, nothing changed. And then Trump's whole campaign in 2016 was, "I'm going to shake things up," but he didn't really shake things up, despite what Reddit and the media might have you believe. Then we have Republicans shut down House floor to avoid Epstein vote from Newsweek.com, posted by Donald Key, and that's cross-post from the No Shit Sherlock subreddit. And yeah, that's kind of another thing they had. But and I agree that most Republicans are corrupt and are probably implicated in the files. But there are some good Republicans like Thomas Massie who are trying to release files. But you're never gonna see that on subreddit like this one. That's pretty much all just DNC propaganda, because they're never. The subreddit operates really on the rules of just Republicans bad, Orange Man bad, in-group good, or or at least in-group passable, or that's the word. They're mostly incompetent, I guess. And yeah, they'll always go after who's ever in the out-group, even though I would say both parties are the in-group. As George Carlin said, it's a big club, and you ain't in it. They're all pretty much all in there. Maybe with a few exceptions like Thomas Massie, as I said. But it doesn't really matter, I would say, because they're never going to release the full files, because it would illegitimize the U.S. government in the eyes of too many people, I would say, as I talked about earlier. Then we have everything is prohibited, which is not specifically permitted. Personal freedom when the ideals of socialism are taken seriously, from Lemon Limelight. and that they posted in the Constitution of Liberty. Friedrich Hayek writes about the rule of law as a restraint of the state and how individual liberty suffers when society retreats from general rules that apply equally to all. Very briefly, socialists in the late 19th century recognized the incompatibility between equal treatment under the law and the demands for social justice, directly addressing the unequal conditions, e.g., personal qualities and economic position requires unequal treatment. Hostility towards impartial justice was influenced by several distinct legal theories, which shared a dislike of any limitation of authority by rules of law and shared a desire to give the organized forces of government greater power to shape social relations deliberately according to some ideal of social justice. The most important of these theories, legal positivism, gave anti-libertarian forces the rationale to abandon the rule of law in order to realize their ideas. To act justified state must be released from the fetters of abstract rules. A free state was about to be one that could treat its subjects as it pleased. Hayek then used communist Russia as an example. Emphasis added, the inseparability of personal freedom from the rule of law is shown most clearly by the absolute denial of the latter, even in theory, in the country where modern despotism has been carried furthest. The history of the development of legal theory in Russia during the early stages of communism, wherein the ideas of socialism were still taken seriously, and the problem of the rule of law as such and system was extensively discussed, is very instructive. As communist theorists expressed it, the fundamental principle of legislation or private law, which the bourgeoisie threatened fierce would never recognize, everything is prohibited which is not specifically permitted. Ironically, those who value individual liberty owe a small debt of gratitude to the communist theorists. Explicit expressions of such totalitarianism help people realize that instead of promised greater freedom, socialism would mean the appearance of a new despotism. And I agree with all that. Just because the state might say, a lot of communists and socialists, they might say they're libertarian socialists or libertarian communists, doesn't mean they are. When they get the reins of the state, they've shown to time and time again evolve into tyranny like Stalin, Mao, or Pol Pot, and that just goes to show you can't trust people when it comes to their word. You have to trust them by their actions. And communism, it might sound great in theory, but in practice, it's always results in government tyranny every single time. And then we have Karma Strikes Back. Connor from Jubilee Video got fired from his job for Mundane Image 13, and that's a cross post from the FOMOA subreddit. And that's a tweet from Chief Evers, the literal fascist who got exposed on Jubilees and fired from his job. Love that for him. And yeah, personally, I don't really watch Jubilee videos. I think they're mostly just rage bait. But regardless of what he said, I'm personally tired of cancel culture. I think we need to cancel culture and just let people express their freedom of beliefs and opinions without the fear of getting reprimanded or fired from their job. But sadly, on Reddit, cancel culture might as well be one of the pillars of its religion, along with pornography and atheism. On Reddit, and censorship probably as well. They love censored. They worship at the altar of censorship. Reddit, they just love seeing anyone who disagrees with them censored, fired from their job, just tortured in any way whatsoever, because they seem to get off to that. And yeah, just because you don't like someone or their beliefs or opinions doesn't mean you should celebrate their failures and misery. But of course, Reddit, they just exist to just jerk themselves off about how moral and righteous they are, while jerking off how bad the outgroup is. And yeah, it gets tiring after a while, but you get used to it, I would say. And yeah, I think we're gonna wrap it up there. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.